Hello, this is Chris Haskell from They Live by Film. For those that don't know us, Adam, Zach, and we built a podcast over the last 2 years that's a combination of film discussion from three very different perspectives, as well as industry interviews with the leaders in boutique Blu-ray and 4K community. We started with Dev Crocodile, but over time we've been lucky enough to speak with Arrow Video, Severin, Mondo Macabro, Vinegar Syndrome, Radiance, Indicator, most of the OCN partner labels. It's been a blast. You can find us wherever you podcast, and also actually recently as part of Someone's Favorite Production Podcast Network. We hope to see you online.
Hello there, and welcome back to the Disc Connected. I'm here with Mitchell Beaupre, who's the senior editor at Letterboxd and the co-host of the Letterboxd Show podcast. Mitchell, thanks for hanging out tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm stoked because Letterboxd obviously is not to sing too high praise over what is literally just an app, but like one of the most important tools in the world for movie fans in our current life. What's going on at Letterboxd lately? Let's just breach the surface there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, no, I agree. Like, I was a Letterboxd member from like when it was back in beta in like 2012. So like I was a user for a very long time before I started working there, and it does feel like there's this weird like shift of like pre-Letterboxd and post-Letterboxd. Like it's hard to imagine a movie life where I was just like I was the kind of person who used to have like spreadsheets of like everything, like rankings of every movie I've ever seen by year and like all that kind of stuff. And so to be able to have Letterboxd where you can just have all of that right there is very convenient. As far as what's been going on over there, I mean, I feel like Letterboxd is in this interesting place where we've really blown up a lot more. Like I feel like people like you and me have known of Letterboxd for a long time, but in the last like year, like I feel like it's kind of raised to another level of kind of cultural awareness. Even just doing like interviews and stuff with like actors and directors, I think that we've definitely noticed a marked change in the last like 2 years, probably of, 2 years ago, if I was interviewing somebody, I would have to explain what the concept of Letterboxd even is to most people. Whereas now, if I try to start doing that, they're just like, "Oh, I know what Letterboxd is. I have a private account that I don't like share with anybody or whatever." Right. So it's been nice to see. It's definitely exciting that it's catching on a lot more and hitting different avenues than it's been at.
Now you're starting to catch some of those, lower level users like the Scorseses and the
just small time people.
It's been an interesting time. Obviously, the four favorites are blowing up on TikTok. The YouTube videos of the DiCaprio and Scorsese interviewing each other are doing extremely well. Yeah. But now, I mean, it's that thing. It's like part of the movie fan lexicon. It is something that they rely on heavily, and to be someone that was there before that and now to be here through the rise, I imagine has to feel pretty damn exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre, honestly. Like I ended up getting the gig because I like somebody that I've been friends with since like high school had been working there before me and kind of recommended me, and like obviously I went through like the whole interview process and all of that jazz, but it's like it still has very like startup culture vibes. Like we definitely, I think, produce to the extent that it looks like we're a much bigger company. But like even now we have like 20 staff members, and I mean that was like a year ago we probably had like 10. When I signed on 3 years ago, I was like one of like 5, and so it's definitely a very like bootstrapped operation, but I think we're able to make it look like we're operating on a much higher scale.
So what does a senior editor at Letterboxd do? Because I gotta admit, I checked my reviews from last week and there's still mistakes, so you're obviously not editing much.
I'm not hitting all of them. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I feel like my main job on like a day-to-day is we have an editorial section of the site called Journal, which if you're on the app or if you're on the website, there's a tab at the top that says Journal, and you can go there, and that has all of our like like interviews, or I mean, not all of our interviews. Some of them we just do, like the red carpet stuff is just living on socials and on YouTube or whatever, but more like long form print interviews we have on there. We have kind of regular columns that freelancers or staff members will write for us. We just did like our best of Sundance, where we had some people there, some people attending there, and just kind of wrapped up like writing on our favorites or whatever. And that's kind of like on my day to day. But also, as is the case with a lot of startups, like I do, even though that's my like main job, I do a lot of different things. I work a couple social shifts a week where I'm like running our social media. I do the podcast, as you mentioned up top. I, tap in helping with like captions on videos that we post on YouTube and everything. So it definitely is like an operation where everybody kind of has like their job, and then most of the days you're like getting pulled in from somebody else who's like, hey, I need somebody to help me with this, like real quick, do you have like 2 hours? And you just kind of like, it's very like freewheeling from day to day.
Well, you are a very busy person outside of Letterboxd too. You try to do your best to contribute everywhere that you can, promote film in general, physical media. We're going to get into physical media hard, of course, but a lot of this is just time consuming. And for somebody that loves film, I got to ask, like, health check. How are you doing there? Are you still able to watch a lot? Are you feeling good about it?
No, that's a great question. Honestly, that's actually a really good question. I feel like it's something that I'm very consciously aware of and try to like do that kind of check in with myself, because I get into this thing of, because I either work for Letterboxd or other podcasts that I'm like doing where I have to watch stuff for that and like do kind of like extensive research and stuff like that to make sure I'm kind of boned up on that stuff, or like freelance pieces that I write for like Pace Magazine or like the Film Stage or whatever. I get into pockets where I realize that for the last like 2 months, I haven't watched a single movie that's like not for like a work thing I'm doing. Yeah. And like, I love being able to watch movies as part of my job or whatever, but it can be taxing. Like some nights I'm just like, I don't want to have to be writing notes and like thinking about what I'm going to, write about this movie or whatever as I'm watching it. And so I try really hard to be better about that. I think from like October through January, I didn't really do any podcasts. I didn't really do any interviews. Like I just kind of needed a break from that stuff. And I'm kind of getting a little bit back into the swing of it now. But in that time, I definitely like made a point to myself to like, at least like 2 nights a week, I need to just make a point, even if it feels like I need to watch so much stuff for like work things I'm doing, at least 2 times a week, I just need to make sure that I'm watching something that's like unrelated to anything to do with work. And I think that's been helpful for me.
It's weird to try to explain to somebody that doesn't love film, but it's true that like if you're working on this a lot of the time and only watching what you're actually kind of required to talk about, it's like exercising constantly with no rest days. And that rejuvenation of watching something that you want to watch, it's really important to make you appreciate it all appropriately.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's like the biggest like champagne problem in the world. Like as a teenager, like thinking about like, oh, I, would have some reservation at some point about watching movies as part of my job. And you see it like all of like people, shit on critics because they're like, you just watch movies, like that's all you do all day. And it's like, I mean, no, like you really have to, like it definitely is like a very like mentally strenuous like position to be in, where you're like actively having to think about how you're going to comment on this thing or like analyze it or whatever, and then like doing all the research and everything for stuff. You can't just like, at least for me, you can't just spit out like these thoughts like right after coming out of something. You really want to get all the context, get all read what other people have said about it. Sometimes like if you're doing a podcast or whatever, like catch in on like the cultural legacy of something. But I know it's like similar for you, because you're trying to keep up with like all the new physical releases that are coming out, which is very similar of like wanting to make sure you're digesting everything for interviews and everything else that you're doing, the awards and stuff like that you do. Like you want to, hit all of the right things. And then at a certain point, you're like, well, I just want to watch something that's like just to chill with.
Oh yeah, and then it gets to the point where you're working on special features for some disc, and you've watched a movie 5 times. The first time, sure, it's a little enjoyable, but by number 5, you're like, okay, I've seen this character die 6 times now.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you kind of lose sight of like it becomes that thing of like when you're like
Right.
you have a favorite song that you've heard a million times and you go to listen to it and it just like doesn't even register for you anymore
Nope.
because you've heard it so many times. Like there's definitely movies like that for me where I'm like I put it on or somebody else is like let's watch this movie and I'm like sure I love that movie and they put it on and I'm just like kind of like blank like the
Yep.
entire time because it like you can just recite it, word for word.
Of course. Gosh, yeah, physical media. Let's get into that because one
Yeah.
of the things that I respect the hell out of you for this because with Letterboxd and with the appearances that you do on Screen Drafts and everything with Billy Ray and the Incinerator and Mansplaining, everything that you've done with everybody, it seems to always go back to this is available on disc here, or this is I'm going to shout out Fun City Editions for being great. I'm going to give my the people that are here tuning into my opinion a way to dive into physical media because it's disappearing for that mainstream aspect. It really is only such a small subset. So why is it still important to you?
Yeah, it's a really crazy time that I feel like we're living in right now because so much of physical media is dying out, and then at the same point, like so much of the interest and like the excitement from like the average Joe consumer is dying out on physical media because there is so much stuff that's just right there on Netflix or, Max or whatever. But I feel like for people like you and me, we understand that this is kind of the best time in the history of the world to be a physical media collector, to be a fan of it. Like the stuff that boutique labels are doing right now is like out of this world. And yeah, for me, I think that, one, there definitely is just in terms of quality, like compression rates and everything on streaming services, like you're not seeing the same thing that you're watching if you're watching it on a disc. Also, like the preservation aspect of it is such a huge thing about it's a huge passion for me in general. It's a huge passion for me in terms of like what, like even my work at Letterboxd, like I really try to focus as much as I can on bringing awareness to movies that have been lost, movies that, need to be found, movies that have been found. Something like Bushman, which Milestone Films just put out, was, made in the 70s, was not available, period, until this new restoration just came out in theaters and will be on disc at some point. And so I think trying to keep people aware of the fact that like, and I think there's a little bit like the Coyote versus Acme stuff is going on right now. Like there's like a little bit of like people waking up, but I still think it hasn't hit like the normal person, the average, like the casual movie lover, that like so many of these movies can just disappear off the face of the earth with like no warning. Like all of those Max movies that were available only on there that suddenly have just dropped off the face of the earth that you can't get anymore. Hulu did that as well with several things. Like physical media is a way to kind of keep these movies alive. And I mean, that for me is even like paying $100 to buy an out of print DVD. That's not the greatest transfer in the world, but it's the only way that you can see a certain movie. And then you watch it and it's like, holy shit. Like most people are not pay, there's plenty of people who don't even have the ability to pay, that kind of money for a DVD. And so like, that's a very privileged position to be in. And it's just a huge shame that like, there's so many movies that just aren't readily available. There's so many movies that aren't on disc, period, that like maybe you can find on like a YouTube rip somewhere. Something like the Dion Brothers is something that like I have only seen. Inside Out with Elliot Gould is like a crazy movie that is so much fun and is not available. And it's not on streaming services anywhere. It's not on disc anywhere. Like there is a YouTube rip that is up somewhere. And I've watched, that's the only way that I've watched it. The Heartbreak Kid is a great example of something like that, where it's like rights just lapsed. It's owned by like a pharmaceutical company or whatever, right? And like
so ridiculous.
Like the only way that you can watch it is on like there's a YouTube rip, there's the Internet Archive rip that I can't remember the name of the guy who did like the 4K kind of like mock upgrade, which looks really dope. But yeah, I think that for me, physical media is a way to keep that stuff alive. There's so many other elements of it too. I think just the physical, the ritualistic aspect of it is really important for me. That definitely connects to like my childhood, and is something that, in the same way as like I don't do any like digital books. I don't have like a Kindle or anything like that. I still, when I'm reading a book, like I like the textural aspect of it. And then physical media, that's the only way that you get these special features. And I think, as you well know, as people who check out this show well know, like the special features opens up a different kind of world to you of appreciating these movies. There's so many movies that I really like when I watch them, but then digging through the special features, like that's where I'm like, oh, this is like so high level. This is so much better than I even realized it was while I was watching it. And I can only fully appreciate a movie while diving into the full extent of what's being put into that work on the physical disc.
It's mind-blowing to have that first experience, because even just now you said it's sometimes movies you like and then you dive in and it's so much better. I've had times where it's been a movie I haven't even liked that much.
Yeah, me too.
And then you watch something, you go, oh, wait, that changes everything. And now suddenly I've done that and then found myself in like a research spiral after this, because it teaches you something. And it's like, wait a minute, I didn't even like this movie. And now it's like the only thing I can think about for 3 weeks. It's wild.
Yeah.
The other big part of this too is, the accessibility aspect that you're going on about. I feel like the only way we get this to be a problem for everybody is until it's a problem for the individual, which sucks, because it's kind of like what we're dealing with politics right now. A lot of people are tuned out until it's something that affects them personally. And a lot of these families, they don't care because everything's on Disney Plus that they're watching, until suddenly somebody unlocks a memory and they go, oh, let me go watch that. Wait, it's not on anything. How do I find this? And then they're, whoa, what do we do now? There's no other thing. And that's still kind of that ritual aspect you brought up, because they normally know how to go find it, but now they're clueless. And I really wish there was a way to deliver that message universally somehow.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, it's the kind of thing where like too, because of stuff like that, the accessibility aspect, like I don't like necessarily begrudge anybody who isn't, a physical media collector. Like I think that it's really important. Like it's extremely important for me. It's like the thing that is my greatest kind of passion and my greatest, I wouldn't even call it a hobby. Like I am every day, thinking and checking and like seeing like what else is coming out. And definitely putting a lot of that into my work as well. But it definitely is a luxury that comes with having the job that I have, and with honestly not having a lot of other interests. So like I'm not putting a lot of money into other stuff. I don't have a family. So like I don't have to worry about, setting aside money to feed the kids and stuff like that. And so like people who primarily just watch stuff on Disney Plus because that's what's most affordable to them. That's what's most available to them. Like I totally get that. But yeah, like you said, like especially a company like Disney, like, as we were growing up, you and me, like Disney had the thing of they would release a movie for 3 months and then put it in the vault for 10 years and you wouldn't be able to access it, period. And like, it's a way to try to like eventize, the physical release. But what it really does is keep that away from people for so long. I used to work at a movie store where we would this movie store, Movie Stop, that was around for like 10 years, went out of business in 2014. And we would regularly we bought and sold used movies. It wasn't like a rental store. It was like buying and selling used movies. And we sold new movies as well. But the biggest kind of business there was turning around. People would sell us their old movies and then we would sell them used. It was basically GameStop. It was like the sister company of GameStop, which I think more people are familiar with. And we every day would have people coming in with like lists of like the Disney movies that they were asking if we had used copies of. And it would be like, no, we like barely ever have them. Every now and then somebody would come in and sell a bunch of them, get a bunch of money because they're rare and out of print. And then somebody would come in an hour later, buy all of those. And then, you wouldn't see him again on the shelves for like 3 months until the next person did that.
Wow. That's the exact sort of definition of what we're fighting now. But with the streaming age, it's such a different problem because there's no person turning them in. There's no access to any of these when they're taken away. And again, I know that it sounds like a privilege problem when somebody's talking about this, and it's like, oh, whoever big name star is of the day that has their movie deleted, it's gone, no big deal. There's like 400 people that worked on that movie that put their heart and soul into that for months, and now they are not able to make any more money from it. They're not able to have their work out there for the world. That's a really hard thing to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what we were seeing with like the writer's strike and the SAG strike this past year, where, a lot of people were thinking that it's just, hoity-toity rich people complaining about not getting, $4 million for making a movie when it's like, no, the people that like these strikes are for are the people who rely on they're living paycheck to paycheck doing this work. Like this is for most people a job like anybody else has a job. Like it's not people who have mansions, it's people who are grinding it out every day. And yeah, like you said, like when a movie disappears, that disappears for so many people who could point to that and be like, hey, here's an example of my work. You know, let me get this new job. It's where now it's like, oh, I can't, like, I don't have anything to reference to see if you're good or not at your job. So like, it's not, I'm not going to hire you for this.
There's no more resume at that point. You're screwed.
Exactly. Yeah. Like if you're lucky if you like have something somewhere that's like a reel that you've put together. Like if you're an editor, like maybe you have something on a drive somewhere that you've stored, but like you can't have a full example for people to look at.
Well, and most extras aren't going to have that. For example.
Yeah. The people that are putting into that kind of work. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So there's crises involved in a lot of different stages of home video, of media consumption in general, in social media. And what's funny is at the heart of all of that right now seems to kind of be Letterboxd, and the community that comes around that is obviously growing. But on top of that, it's its own subset of, it's got like its own personality. It's growing into this thing that has real empathy, real advocacy power, where people are speaking out on behalf of arts and all that. Does it feel like that from inside Letterboxd? Does it feel like you're manifesting that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely part of our, like, I think we all try to stay humble, and so we try not to like think that we are like actively affecting change in like a huge way, but I definitely think that we're very focused on mission and drive, and a big part of our mission is raising awareness for the kinds of movies that aren't the ones that are getting, you know, talked about on Entertainment Tonight or whatever, and for like we have, you know, the interviews with Martin Scorsese or whatever, and obviously those are going to do really good numbers, but I think, and like we're at a point where we could just do that. I think that we have enough like access where we could just focus on the huge names, but we definitely try to still do coverage on movies that are smaller ones, whether it's, you know, new releases too, and like movies that we know are not going to get us the same amount of numbers on like a print piece interview or a YouTube video or whatever, but we feel like that's sort of our responsibility as a company that has the platform that we do have, you know, to use that to raise awareness. And I like our biggest drive from like the top of the company down is always like, we want to talk about movies and cover movies in a way that gets people to add more movies to their watch list, to get people more excited about discovering other movies. And so like, that's where the lists come in, you know, in a really big way, where it's like, if we're talking about, you know, this one movie on a podcast or whatever, we can reference, oh, it's on this list, and get people to go to that list to see movies that are like that. You know, if you're looking for the specific thing, and you can find all these movies that you haven't heard of. I know for me, like I've discovered so many movies through Letterboxd because of people talking about movies that I like. And then they're talking about this other movie in relation to it, and I'm like, oh, I want to check that out. I know Harakiri, the Japanese samurai movie from the 60s, like I had never heard of that movie until like 10, 12 years ago. I noticed that it was like number 30 on the Letterboxd top 250 of all time. And it was like the highest ranked movie that I had never seen, let alone heard of. And I'm like, oh, let me check that out. I watched it. It is now one of my like 30 favorite movies of all time. Nice. And now it's at a point where it's the number one highest rated movie on Letterboxd, like of all time. And I think that's so dope. Like you compare that to like IMDb, where it's like been Shawshank for the last ages. 30 years or whatever. And to be working at a company where like our number one highest rated of all time is Harakiri, like that's pretty rad. And I think that having that status on Letterboxd like gets people to go and watch it, you know, like 200,000 people have like marked it watched on Letterboxd, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I imagine that was a lot lower, you know, 10 years ago when Letterboxd started.
I am curious, going back to the physical media side, but attaching it to Letterboxd. I know a lot of people use Letterboxd as literally a tool for physical media, whether it's for logging their collection. If they own a movie, they go put it on a list, and that's how they reference it. A lot of people mark how they watch things. If they watch it on a new disc, they'll put that in their review and use it a couple ways. Are there any random off-the-wall ways that you've heard of people utilizing Letterboxd as a tool for something like related to physical media?
That's a really good question. Yeah, off the wall ways. Yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, unfortunately. That's a really good question. Like, I definitely, yeah, those kind of ways are definitely the ones that I'm most familiar with, that I use myself. I definitely always like tag everything with like how I watched it.
Yep.
I definitely, I think it's just like it's maybe pro and patron feature, or maybe just patron feature. But if you have a list that you mark as, you like tag it as owned, you can then like filter any list or anything by the movies that you own. I use that literally all the time. Like I'm sure is the case for you as well. I own so many movies that a lot of times I will like see somebody mention a movie and I'm like, do I own that? And like, or like, I'll think like, oh, I want to watch that tonight and can't remember if I own it or not. So like, it's very useful rather than going to my shelves and trying to find like where it is somewhere. Just looking at Letterboxd and seeing if I own it. But yeah, I can't think of people in like very like more idiosyncratic ways.
I imagine there's somebody out there that is doing something that is inspiring that other people could hear and go, damn, that's a really smart way. So if you got some unique way, throw it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. I'd love to see unique ways.
Like genuinely, please do. I would love to see that as well. Yeah.
With the list and stuff like that, is there some list that has been the most meaningful for you that you have discovered through your time here that go, damn, I've not seen most of these, and the one that I have, I'm dialed in. I'm going to watch all of these because it's that good.
Yeah, so After Hours, the Scorsese picture, is my favorite movie of all time. And there are several lists. I know there was one that's called like, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it's like, help, I got too horny and now everything's bad. And like After Hours was the first movie on that list. And like, I saw that list like many years ago and I'm like, oh, that is like that. Like, there are many reasons why I love After Hours. That is a very specific reason why I love After Hours.
Movie kink, yeah.
Yeah. And a very specific like vibe that I'm after. And so there were probably a couple of others that I had seen on it, but like at that point I hadn't seen Body Double, I hadn't seen Miracle Mile. I know was on that list. I know like Eyes Wide Shut was on that list, which I've seen before, but there's definitely plenty like that. Like that I think really got me into De Palma in a way that I wasn't into before. I had probably at that point seen like Carrie and the Untouchables and whatever, like some of the big ones, but it definitely got me into stuff like Body Double and like Phantom of the Paradise and everything like that.
God, I love Phantom of the Paradise.
Such a dope movie.
I was so excited too to bring up, and you had to bring it up first, of course. After Hours Criterion 4K last year.
Yeah.
It was the first time I got to see it. I finally got to see your favorite movie, and it is incredible. I was so excited just to celebrate the power of that movie. I mean, everything about it. All the times I've heard you speak on it in such a passionate way, I'm like, yeah, I totally get it. Mitchell is totally right.
That's what everybody's always said. Yeah, and I mean that's a really great example too of like a movie that I saw for the first time like 15 years ago on DVD, and it's one of these rare ones that did a jump from DVD straight to 4K. Like it did not have a Blu-ray release for the longest time. It like periodically would be on like HBO Max or like maybe the Criterion channel like every now and then, but it would have like kind of contract restrictions where it would be on for like 3 months and then would drop off. And so a lot of times like the only way that you would maybe be able to see it would be on DVD. And then I mean, I know Griffin Dunn had been talking a little bit, like teasing a little bit for a while that it was like maybe going to hit Criterion when Griffin Dunn and Amy Robinson did the Chilly Scenes of Winter Criterion like a year ago. Griffin Dunn kind of teased like we're in the Criterion closet, but not for After Hours. Like that's coming later or whatever. And I remember him specifically saying that's coming later had me like over the moon. And then they dropped it. My one bittersweetness is that I didn't get to have any kind of involvement with it. I mean, I'm right here. Reach out to me, do the essay, whatever. It's fine. I did get to interview them for Letterboxd, Griffin and Amy, for the After Hours release, which was really awesome. And yeah, I mean, that's like hearing somebody got to see it for the first time because of the 4K is the coolest thing in the world to me. And that's the kind of movie where like I think physical media, people talking about something and then it becoming more available on physical media really hits this groundswell for a movie that came out in the 80s, did not, do well at the box office or anything, especially for somebody like Scorsese, really got buried amongst his movies and sort of hit a little bit of a groundswell, like over the year, people, became like a cult thing. When I first saw it, it was like very much like the cool kids' favorite Scorsese movie of like, yeah, Goodfellas is great, but what's like really fucking awesome? It's After Hours. And now I think it's a little bit more in the zeitgeist of like, this is actually a masterpiece of a movie and like, you need to seek it out. It's After Hours is like one of those movies that if I made a new friend or I started dating somebody for the first time, within a week, I'm like, hey, let's watch After Hours. And then if they didn't like it, maybe this is maybe we're not cut out for each other.
Well, and it's a true example of a cult film. It's one of those things that had to kind of spread by word of mouth because most people were not seeing it in the theaters. Most people, it wasn't playing on, ABC on Sunday nights in 1991. So it's something that you had to spread. And even that DVD was out of print for a long time. So accessibility, again, is so important behind so many of these films. One of the things that we kind of started to go into there a little bit is there are pockets of all of, whether it be film Twitter or the dark Letterboxd corner reviews or physical media YouTubers. There are so many groups that have sometimes this attitude of, oh, you haven't seen that?
Yeah.
Man, that's kind of embarrassing. What are you doing? And something about the way that you have approached things always is so celebratory. When somebody just discovers something new, it's so wholesome and just welcoming. And I just, first off, I just want to say thank you, because there's so many people that will, lambast somebody for, this is the first time you've seen Taxi Driver. What the hell are you doing? It's 2023 or whatever. I don't understand why that exists. The gatekeeping does not need to happen, but you've done so well to advocate for it.
Well, I really appreciate that. That actually like genuinely means a lot to me, because I grew up as like a teenager in my 20s on like the IMDb message boards, and like that was always such a toxic place for that kind of elitism, that kind of snobbiness of people just thinking like, one, like whatever their opinion and their taste is like so much above anybody else. But then also, exactly that kind of stuff. And like that's the stuff that like riles me the most. I have friends, like my roommate like gets embarrassed about certain movies that they haven't seen. And like, for me, it's like anybody who hasn't seen one of my favorite movies, that's like the most exciting thing in the world to me, because I get to experience through them seeing my favorite movie for, one of my favorite movies for the first time. And for me, like, I definitely get that like wariness of admitting when I haven't seen something. That's a really huge one. Like I make a list every year of like 52 movies that I haven't, like 52 blind spots that I want to make sure that I watch, over the course of the year. And last year, one of the movies on that list was The Passion of Joan of Arc, the Dreyer movie from the 20s, which is like one of, the peak, like this is one of the greatest movies ever made kind of thing. And I'm like a little bit like, I had people when I had that on my list, like friends be like, you haven't seen that before? Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. And I'm like, yeah, it's dope. I'm going to watch it for the first time like this year. Like, I know that like I should have, seen it before, but at the same time, like I mean, I watched it blew my mind. Maybe I wouldn't have appreciated it as much if I had watched it when I was 20. And so for me, it's always an exciting thing when somebody hasn't seen a movie. Like, I mean, I love talking to people about movies, but then if you get to talk to them about it right after they watched it, like that's even better.
It's this magical, again, I love the word advocacy for this, because you are literally delivering a message to somebody that may not have ever received that message if you weren't delivering it. So it's so cool just to be like, here's After Hours, one of the greatest movies of all time, and I get to stare at your face and watch you react to the ridiculous storyline as it's happening.
Yeah, there's a little bit of anxiety watching. And definitely I know people like meme about it all the time. The like fear, like as you're watching, like you're waiting for like a great moment. And After Hours, like you're waiting for like the reveal of Terry Garr's like mouse traps all around her bed, and you're like looking at the person like, are their eyes gonna expand a little bit when that comes up? Like, are they gonna laugh at the scene where the ticket taker in the subway says that he can't let Griffin Dunn in because he's scared that maybe one night he'll get drunk at a party and tell him that he let this guy in for paying less than what the ticket actually costs. Like, definitely, yeah, it's a high wire act of watching one of your favorite movies with somebody who hasn't seen it before, but it's exhilarating.
With the interviews, you just mentioned how Letterboxd could probably just stay with the big names, and I'm really glad that it sounds like that's not going to be the case, because I really want to draw some eyes to one of the ones that I've enjoyed the most from you over the years, which now, gosh, it's probably been almost 2 years. The Aubrey Plaza piece, which was for Emily's a Criminal, when that came out. Just hearing, first off, two people talk about Delaware for the first 5 paragraphs is so fun. But just to make somebody like her, who is this mythical character wherever she goes, but just be brought down to that base human level. And these sort of stories are the best way to get that sort of thing for somebody that's now reached her stratosphere of incredible stardom, where she is, suddenly sought after in everything, even though she was essentially just an extra, like it seems like just yesterday. So, I mean, some of those earlier pieces, is there any of those that you are really fond of that you look back on with just pure pride of what you got to do?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I thank you very much for saying that. That was a really exciting one for me, because as somebody who, like, I wasn't born in Delaware, but I've lived here for 20 years, and it is like, especially as somebody in like the like film industry, where like most of my colleagues are in like New York or LA, right. Most of my contemporaries are in like big city Chicago, like whatever, like it being like, I'm literally the only person that I know in Delaware who like does this kind of job and everything, and so having like Aubrey Plaza is the queen of Delaware. Like, she's from Wilmington, she's literally from a town that is like 5 minutes from where I'm living right now, right. And so not only like the idea of getting to talk to her was really exciting for me, but also like for me, I love like the red carpet stuff we do. I love like the 4 faves stuff that we do. It's not really like my bag in terms of like the kind of stuff, like the kind of combos that I'm interested in having with like actors and stuff like that. These like little like snippets where you get to like ask stuff. Like I really do like having the longer form conversations for print pieces or a podcast or whatever. And so being able to talk to her for 30 minutes for something like that was really exciting. Being able to like, I was very nervous going into that conversation, because I knew that I was going to want to start with like, I'm literally in Delaware, like, let's talk about Delaware. Right. And I was like, I get such anxiety when I know I'm going to ask somebody something that's like not the thing that they're getting asked like constantly throughout the day. It's not like the boilerplate stuff. And I'm like, she could be like, what fuck? No, like, I don't give a shit about Delaware. Like, I don't want to talk about that. But what I told her, like, I was like, so first things first, like, I'm talking to you right now from Newark, Delaware. And she her jaw dropped. Like, she was like, she couldn't believe it. And she was so down to talk about Delaware for like half the interview. And the other half, we talked about Emily the Criminal, which I think is a phenomenal movie. It's my favorite performance of hers. It very much harkens back to like 70s crime movies and all that kind of stuff. Like, I really love it. But to answer your question as well about like the earlier kind of stuff that I did, ones that really stood out to me, my first interview for Letterboxd Journal was with Michael Sarnowski, the director of Pig. And that I think is a really, really special movie. That's a movie that like hit me in the heart in a really deep way. I know like Nicolas Cage talks about that being like his favorite movie of his, which is awesome. But I also think that even like when it came out, it got good notice from people, especially people like us that are kind of in like the paying attention to the indie movies and stuff like that. But it really, I think even in the 3 years since then, it's kind of like fizzled out a little bit. People don't really talk about it too much. And like, it would have been great. Like, I'm sure it would have been amazing to talk to Nicolas Cage about it, but being able to talk to the director about it and like talk about what was really important for him to put into that, and like the amount of like empathy and like understanding of how special like a day is, and how special like the connections that we have, and what it means to like really have a passion for something. In that film, Nicolas Cage's character is passionate about cooking. Obviously, the director making is passionate about, you know, making movies, and like what all that entails. Like that's the kind of combo that I really appreciated being able to have, especially kind of early into me doing this stuff, where I got to have an understanding that these are the kind of conversations you can have with people if that's the kind of stuff you're interested in talking about.
Well, and it sets the foundation for what is to come from somebody stepping into a new role like you did. And with that, not only the Letterboxd, but if anybody's going, you know, this person named Mitchell's about to interview me, I'll look him up and see what he's done. And that's what they read, and they go, oh shit, like he likes to really get into this. Okay, this is going to be awesome. Like that means a lot to a lot of these people.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that I definitely really do try to go into like any interview I do with just wanting to come at it from like a more, just like a deeper place of not wanting to have them to have the same exact conversation that, because a lot of times when you, and this is a thing that I didn't, you know, I couldn't possibly have comprehended before doing this job, what like reading interviews constantly and whatever, but like when you're doing these kind of interviews, for the most part, like you're doing it on a day where the person that you're talking to is talking to 20 other people that are interviewing them and asking a lot of the exact same questions over and over again. So a lot of times, like I go into that kind of stuff, like reading interviews they've done before, seeing what the questions they've been getting asked are, and then like going in with like, okay, they've been asked this, how do I take that response that they had and like go deeper? And like my question is like, you said, you know, I read you say in this interview like this and this, could you like elaborate on this in this kind of way? Or like that made me think of this, and like go in like a different, deeper direction with it. And so I think for me, like that's part of my approach. And then I mean, sometimes you're lucky and you do get to have like conversations with people completely off of like that junkety kind of circuit, and you do get to talk to them for an hour, and like it's the, you know, the one conversation they're having that day or whatever, and you can see that they're more like energized and engaged. I know too, like doing that junket stuff, like I've had interviews where it's like like I'm into the interview at the beginning, and like I tell them that, you know, I really admire their work. You know, thanks for taking the time to talk to me. And they're like, this is, you know, I'm really tired. Like, I'm sorry if I don't like, you know, give you what you're hoping for from this. And it's like, okay, let me recalibrate myself and like, you know, try to like, it's a tricky thing of like meeting people's energies. I've definitely have had times. I mean, that the after hours interview, I definitely like recognized after it was over, or even maybe like halfway through the interview, like I came into that with like in my head, like this is my favorite movie of all time, I'm so excited to talk to them, and I definitely came in with like way too high of energy, and like 10 minutes in I like recognized that kind of like I was coming in too hot, and like I needed to kind of recalibrate and like tone myself down to like meet them where they're at. And so I definitely think that that's something that I try to pay attention to a lot, is not letting myself lose sight of the fact that like whoever I'm talking to, that's a person that I'm talking to, like they're having a whole experience that day. And so like I really try to have a conversation rather than like just trying to milk whatever I can out of them.
Well, and on the job side too, it's you're trying to do a good job for people that are going to read for you and for what you're literally being paid for. And for those interviews, doing something unique is really what's going to set that apart. Because on the junket circle, I mean, nobody wants to hear what's the main story behind your character 25 times in one day. And so if you can bring that one question that they go, oh shit, like I respect the hell out of you for even noticing this, that means a lot to them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even like the Aubrey Plaza thing is a really good example. The Delaware thing, like I had a meeting a while back with this woman who's like the acting coach of Nicole Kidman, and she like that interview happened like 2.5 years ago or whatever, the Aubrey Plaza one, and she was like, hey, I saw that Aubrey Plaza interview, and like that was one of my favorite interviews I've ever read. And it's like, oh, like that actually means a lot. The other day I interviewed Eric Bana, who's an actor I really love. And I got the chance, like, I pitched it specifically as like to his publicist as like, I want to talk like through his career, kind of like go through different films or whatever. And I was worried they weren't going to be down for that, because I didn't want them to think like, oh, like I just want to talk about Hulk for, 30 minutes and not like his new movie or whatever. But what I really wanted to do was dive into some of the deeper cuts. Like I talked about Lucky You, the Curtis Hanson movie, which did not get well received, but like I've always really liked. And one thing that we talked about, I love the movie Troy. Like that Troy is my favorite Eric Bana movie. But I knew that I had one chance to maybe ask him a question about Troy. And so I really honed in on asking him about the Hector and Achilles fight scene that happens in Troy, which is, I think, one of the best scenes of action cinema of the last like 30 years. And I like went in with that, and like he responded, and he definitely like lit up. Like he literally is giving me like prayer hands as I'm like talking about like why I love that scene. And then he starts his, and like when I ask him the question about it, he kind of answers by starting by saying like, thanks so much. Nobody's ever like broken it down like that. And like that to me, like that's like the biggest endorphin rush that I could ever get. Like somebody like thanking me for a question or like a specific angle that I have on a question. And like it does not happen every time, which is fine. I don't expect it to happen ever. But when it does happen, like that to me is the most gratifying experience.
Well, now I got to think of something to ask you that'll get that response. No, I genuinely, it's something that I've appreciated and it's one of those things that you can sense, even though usually those sorts of compliments or feedback is not in the print interviews, but you can feel the sense of like, this seems novel to the celebrity being interviewed. This seems important to both of them. And the opposite is also true. In these junket interviews, you can sense this isn't really important to one of the two parties. It's somebody that's starstruck and somebody that could not possibly give less of two shits than what they're spending their time doing with you. So it feels invigorating. It feels amazing. And as somebody that's trying to interview much of my life, it is genuinely inspiring to read stuff like the Aubrey Plaza interview. That is just, I mean, it's human at its heart, which is not something that you can say about many of these interviews.
I really do. Like, I genuinely, like, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate that. That really means a lot to me, because I especially as somebody who kind of, like, I haven't been doing this like a very long, like there are people who have been doing this a lot longer than I have, you know, and people who I respect the hell out of. Like I'm a very like I have imposter syndrome like out the wazoo, you know. I regularly think that like I'm garbage, you know, like I'm not good at any of this stuff, like nobody likes anything that I'm doing. And so like, you know, not to like fish for compliments in any way whatsoever, but like that honestly, like that really means a lot, because especially like doing it, I think it is a very like isolated kind of job to have, where I don't get a ton of feedback other than like, okay, the place I work for printed the thing that I did, so like obviously they thought it was decent enough. But like you don't, especially like in this day and age, like social media being what it is or whatever, you don't get like a ton of feedback. So a lot of days, like I definitely have like the sense of like, I don't know if anybody's reading the things that I'm even doing, let alone like if they like it, you know, other than my mom, who reads and listens to everything that I do. And I deeply appreciate that.
Same to my mom. Thank you, moms. By the way, all moms, you're doing a great job. Let's get back to the physical media for a minute, because somebody that advocates so much about it, I got to know what you look for. What are you collecting? What are the companies currently exciting you?
Yeah, a great question. It's definitely like a lot of things. Like I certainly look for, you know, I mean, the titles that pop for me, the ones that are, you know, the ones that are like my favorites, getting the 4K release or whatever, getting, you know, the big booklets that I love. Like I love a booklet essay. Like I am feverish about booklet essays. I read them all. And so like anytime, you know, places like Vinegar Syndrome and like obviously Criterion and Fun City Editions and stuff like that, like they're doing the Radiance is like doing them on every release, and I really appreciate that. A lot of like the big ones like Kino Lorber, they put out so much stuff they don't have, you know, that kind of stuff, and it's something that I like a lot of what Kino Lorber does. They're, you know, I mean, they're producing, you know, like upgrades and like 4Ks and everything like nobody else's business. But like,
I think last year was 250 releases. For them.
250. Yeah, like as far as like kind of like boutique labels go, like they're producing like nobody else is.
Right.
But I think some of their releases they don't have a ton of special features. Like some of their releases do
Right.
feel a little bit lacking to me, even though like I always appreciate having like the transfers and stuff like that. But for me, I just mentioned them. You mentioned that I talk about them a lot. Fun City Editions is my favorite label, bar none. Like that's a label that I pick up every single thing that they release,
Right.
like no matter what. And it was like that before I even started having the job that I have. Like I love everything that they do. The specific kinds of films that Jonathan, who's been on your show, who runs the label, like his specific taste, I think is very much in the ballpark of my taste as well. But he's found this really great niche of like every couple releases will be a Breathless or like a Party Girl, where it is a movie that has a little bit more cultural cachet that people are familiar with, people like us are really familiar with and like get really excited about. But a lot of Fun City Editions releases are movies that I've never heard of, and that is extremely exciting for me when I have a label that I know and trust like what they're doing and what they're putting out, and they put out something that I've never heard of. I'm like, oh, I'm about to discover something. I'll say Bobby Roth's Heartbreakers was a Fun City Editions release that I had never heard of. I watched it immediately in my top 20 of all time. Like, and the rest, like the restoration work on it is gorgeous. There's, great special features on it, great interviews and stuff like that. But yeah, just watching it, I'm like, how is nobody, like, it still, I think, has less than like 2,000 watches on Letterboxd, even though, I talk about it every goddamn chance I can get. And like, so stuff like that, it's really exciting for me. Fun City also did like Natural Enemies is one of their releases that I had never heard of before. And one of my coworkers even was like, oh, this is an amazing movie. I've had it on like a VHS or like something like that. I've had like this old rip of it from somewhere. Like it's a really great movie. And so like I dropped in on that. Like Criterion obviously is a huge one. Like I don't need to, talk about how great Criterion is, but like they, especially now that they finally have gotten into 4Ks, like they definitely were a little bit late to getting into 4Ks, but they've kind of been making up for it in a really big way. Like half of their releases every month are 4Ks. The Devil in a Blue Dress 4K, the After Hours 4K, the Lone Star 4K that just came out. Like they're doing really tremendous work on the 4Ks. Radiance, which I know you've had Fran on as well, who runs Radiance. Radiance, similar to Fun City Editions, I think is one where like most of the movies they put out are ones that I haven't heard of, like I'm not familiar with, and I just like check out what the synopsis is, or like I check out the trailer when Fran drops the trailer, and I'm like, this looks fantastic, and I pick up. Yeah. I think I've picked up every single thing that Radiance has released too, because I just trust Fran's taste, and I have not regretted any of them. Like, and they go more in a direction of like the genre stuff, that like European and like Japanese genre stuff a lot, that is the kind of stuff that I normally wouldn't like immediately flock to. Like I very much am like a like new Hollywood, like 80s grime kind of like I love a neo-noir. Emily the Criminal is a neo-noir. Like I love neo-noir. I love like the gritty kind of crime stuff, which Fun City Editions does plenty of that. And so like that's the reason why, I gravitated towards them initially. Radiance and what like Fran's doing over there. Some stuff filters into like Miami Blues and The Hot Spot they did, which are both like neo-noirs, which are two of my favorite movies. But then stuff like Big Time Gambling Boss, even though Paul Schrader's my favorite director and has talked, very enthusiastically about Big Time Gambling Boss before, I had never seen. And that was, I think, Radiance's first release. I can't remember if Working Class Goes to Heaven or Big Time Gambling Boss was their first release. Big Time was first. Yeah, okay. So like that, I mean, I watched that and I'm like, oh, like, yeah, this is where it's at. So like, I'm going to keep picking up everything they're doing. And then they dropped something like the World Noir box set that just came out is out of this world. Witness in the City is like, I had never heard of that, even though it has Lino Ventura in it, who I really like a lot from like the Melville movies that he did and stuff like that. And that, just like a tremendous picture. So yeah, Radiance definitely like one that is only like a year old now, but I think has very quickly risen to, the top of my list of like ones that I'm very much paying attention to when they announce they're going to drop some new announcements, and I'm like setting an alarm on my phone to like, be there right away when they announce the new drop.
Radiance is wild. Fran is something else. I literally was emailing with him this morning and just thinking about what he's done in such a short period
It's
of time.
crazy, yeah.
It is stupid. Like the fact that 2023 was the first Radiance title, and we're sitting here going like, yeah, they're up there with Criterion, like some of the greats. It is stupendous what he's been able to pull off. And go ahead.
I was gonna say I love to Fran uses Letterboxd for Radiance in a way that I find really compelling. Like Jonathan too at Fun City, like they are like really following the Letterboxd reviews of the movies they put out, but also Fran on the Radiance Letterboxd account recently made a list of films that he tried to release that for whatever reason couldn't make happen. And in the notes on that list, he explains in detail like what the things were that kind of prevented that release from happening. And I feel like for people who collect physical media, but also people who like are just like the normal person who isn't super interested in physical media like that, I think that was really eye-opening for like what the extent that people like Fran and Jonathan, everybody who's like running these labels and working on these labels, Justin Law Liberty, at Vinegar Syndrome, and now Cinematograph, which is a very exciting new label. They just put out Little Darlings and Red Rock Quest, which I think both of those releases are tremendous.
Yep.
Just the amount of work that these people put in every single day, just trying to get like rights secured, or, a lot of the ones on Fran's Radiance list are like ones that, he got the rights for him, but then like the original materials that they had to try and do the new transfer just like weren't good enough to be able to patch it up enough for a release that he would have been proud and comfortable with putting out into the world. And like I respect the hell out of that. Like there's so many releases out there where people would just drop, like they would know that it's like this isn't the best quality, but like people will buy it if we put it out, so like let's just put it out. But like the amount of like self-respect that you have as somebody who cares about this art form to not put something out if you're not able to have it be the best quality version, like I really appreciate that. There's a lot of Fun City Editions releases too, some Criterion ones too, where like they have, I always appreciate any like restoration that has the details of the restoration, in text at the beginning of the film when you're watching it on like a Blu-ray. And then especially the ones like FCE and Criterion, where like they even explain, they kind of give you a heads up of like there's some some grains, some lines and some scenes of this that you're gonna notice, like we did the best that we could, and like you see them come up, and it's like it gives you like that tactile feeling. It gives you an understanding of like, oh damn, if most of the movie probably looked like this when they got it and you're only seeing it in like 2 scenes, like they put in work to make like this whole thing look as good as it looks.
That's why by far one of my favorite things that they put on some of these discs, and Criterion's done it sometimes but not too often, is the restoration trailers where they'll show you what it used to look like and now what it looks like, and it's mind-blowing. Like it makes me more confident in giving them money because I can see that the work is paying off
100%. Yeah.
The other big thing that I really want to point out, especially about Fran, that transparency alone, just about that one list, but he's transparent about everything, but that one list alone is an immediate confidence booster in everything I feel about him, because it's most people would look at those and go, these are not small titles. Like Visitor Q is on there, and that's one that so many people are like wishing for every single day, and for him to be like, no, we can't, or we tried hard and we weren't able to secure it. There's so many reasons on there that is educational in a really cool, unique way.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. On that list, like the most bittersweet thing that's probably happened to me in the last year is that a few months back, Fran emailed me and asked me if I would be interested in writing a booklet essay for a release that they had in mind that they thought I would be good for. And I was like, hell yeah, of course. Like, just let me know. And like a month or so went by and he hadn't said anything. And I'm like, that's fine. A lot of times like that kind of happens where like you get asked that kind of thing and you don't hear back for a while, especially with physical media stuff, because it takes such a long time. And like, the people making these discs like to try and get the pieces together well ahead of time, and there's a lot of development process with that kind of stuff. But then like a month passes and Fran emails me and he's like, hey, like I'm really sorry about this. I kind of jumped the gun and got excited. I like wasn't able, like the release is just not going to happen that I had in mind for like you doing it. But I'll let you know, like it was the movie that I had, because I don't want to leave you hanging of like not even knowing what it was. It was Choose Me, the Alan Rudolph movie, which is I gave 5 stars to, like one of my favorite movies of all time. And so it's like this really bittersweet moment of like, that's amazing. Like that's so like flattering that he would have had me write it. It's also like this huge moment of like, because that's only available on DVD. It's only been available on DVD, and like I'm like, oh, the bigger disappointment for me than the booklet essay is like we came so close to having a Radiance release of Choose Me on Blu-ray, and then it's not happening. And that's on Fran's list as well, where he explains why it didn't happen and everything. And yeah, that transparency and like exactly what you said, like movies that like, you know, because like, you know, there definitely are some labels that put out like really big name titles and you watch them and you're like, maybe like this, you maybe shouldn't have put it out the way that you put it out, but you were kind of trying to rush it out because you knew that you could get people to buy it because of the name of the movie. And so yeah, Visitor Q is a perfect example of like Fran could have made, especially for like a small label, like a micro boutique label, like Radiance, that's still, you know, it just fresh in their second year, like that could have funded a lot of stuff for him for a while. And to have that respect for what he's doing and respect for the money that people are paying for any of, you know, Radiance releases or whatever, and say like, I'm not going to sell people out like that. And like you said, it makes me all the more confident in buying the things that he puts out because I know that like, that's the person I'm giving my money to.
That it's so important to find, especially if you're going to be buying physical media and you're cognizant about that. It's important for you to align with people that are similar to your taste, similar to your values. And when you find somebody like Fran, it's kind of hard to separate because it's so, it meshes so well with everything. I just want to be supportive of everything he touches.
100%.
God, there's so much that I really want to dive into. One super personal question that I would love to have answered. Letterboxd stars. Everybody rates things differently. How do you rate your movies? So for me, I try to go into it knowing a movie's really hard to make. And most movies probably deserve at least a couple stars just for being a movie, just for existing. And then if they try really hard to make it a shitty movie, I'll take stuff away. But that's why like most of my stuff ends up at like 3.5. Hey, they made a movie. It's pretty good. I couldn't do that. And that's great. But how do you choose how to rate your films?
I've talked kind of a lot recently with, like, you know, over the last year, my friends Dan Mack and Connor O'Donnell, who host the B-Side podcast, who have been on Incinerator, you know them. And like we're all of a similar age. We're all in like our mid 30s. And definitely they both work in production. So they like work actively in like making stuff. So they see how the sausage is made for a lot of things. I don't, but in the job that I have, I definitely get a, you know, better appreciation for how much work goes into all this kind of stuff. But I also am, you know, ostensibly a critic to some degree in my job. And so like, I also don't, you know, want to soft shoe anything. But I'm at a point in my life where like most movies I'm watching and I'm like, I'm watching a movie, like things could be a lot worse. Like I just really, you know, I love movies. And so I definitely am like a little bit more, I don't go below 3 like too often these days. And certainly sometimes I see like I'll think of a movie, like I'll be talking to somebody about a movie and I'm like, oh, that movie's kind of underrated. It's not that bad. And they'll like look at my Letterboxd and they're like, you gave it a 2. And I'm like, oh, let me change that. Like, because I rated it like, you know, 7 years ago when I was a different person. And that's one of the frustrating things for me about something like a Letterboxd. It's flexible, but it is, as all things on the internet, it is a little bit permanent. And so like, you know, there are definitely times where I see a rating that I gave before and I'm like, oh, I was way too harsh on that. I mean, I was a dick when I was younger, like for sure. And I definitely had periods where I was a little bit snobby, where I'm like, oh, that kind of stuff, like, you know, I didn't really like that half star, fuck it. Like, and like now I couldn't even tell you the last time I gave something half a star. You know, I think that for the most part, if I don't like a movie, it's probably like a 2 for me. Like, it's harder for me to go lower than a 2 because like there's usually at least enough in there where I'm like, I can see what they were trying to do. And as long as it's not like morally reprehensible to me on like a base level, I'm very hesitant to go lower than that. But yeah, for the most part, I think if you look at my Letterboxd like histogram, the highest I probably do is like, I probably have given the most like 3.5s out of everything, which is a very like a solid like, yeah, that was pretty good, but not like, not great or anything.
Right.
But for me, I think there are definitely like people on Letterboxd who in their like bio kind of like break down like 5 is a masterpiece, 4.5 is like a masterpiece, but I saw 3 things wrong with it or whatever. Like 2.5 is the average or whatever. I don't have like, for me, rating is like very much vibes based. Like if I come out of a movie, I remember watching Snake Eyes, Back to De Palma for the first time like 2.5 years ago. I was watching it with my roommate. We finished watching it and they're like, what do you rate it? And I'm like, 5, absolutely a 5. And they're like, why? It was like so messy. And I'm like, yeah, but it's a 5. Like,
right.
So I definitely like a very, very vibes based. There are times where I'll come out of a movie thinking like when I'm out of it, I will think like I'm not somebody who tends to think about like what I'm going to rate something as I'm watching it. I know some people kind of like that's something just like programmed into their brain, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because I can change throughout the course of the movie or whatever. But I just don't really think about that while I'm watching a movie. But I'll come out of it and usually like have an idea in my head of like, oh, what that was for me. But I tend to not log or write a review or whatever for usually like a couple days until after I've watched something. So there are definitely times that I'll like come out of something thinking like, that was probably like a 4.5, and then I'll go to like write a review and I'm like, no, it's like as I'm writing I'm like, oh, this is actually a 5. Like this is definitely a 5. Yeah.
I just recently did a show on my channel where we were talking about the best of the decade so far, and I had the exact same thing with Underwater. And what's weird is it kind of feels like there's been a lifetime since Underwater, because that was right before the pandemic. And something about my age and the way that hit at the time, I was like, well, this feels like an Underwater Alien ripoff, and that's it. And so 3.5. And now I looked back and I was like, wait, I still think about this movie like once a week. Why is this only a 3.5?
That's a good goddamn movie.
Like I love that movie.
Yeah, I love that movie too.
Oh man, this has been incredible, and really kind of like the final thing I want to go on here is because you're attached to Letterboxd, which is, like I mentioned at the very beginning, so to bookend it, it's like the heartbeat of the modern film scene for a lot of us that are around the same age and the same sensibilities. Do you see any trends? Do you see anything with filmmaking that is, optimistic for the next couple of years? Or, obviously everybody's always going to lament about comic book films when you're talking about stuff like this, but not even outside of that. Are there any things that are exciting to you about Letterboxd, about the trends behind the movies that we're getting?
Yeah, I mean, the comic book thing is funny because I mean, as last year evidence, I think we're starting to see a little bit of a pushback on them, and I'm very happy about that. I definitely think that there is like and looking at Letterboxd and looking at kind of where things are at, there is like a curiosity that is getting more activated. There definitely is more of like even you look at the Oscars, you see something like Drive My Car getting nominated for Best Picture, Best Director. I mean, this year's Zone of Interest, getting the love it did. Anatomy of a Fall is my favorite movie of 2023, like by far. Like that movie, blew my mind. I'm completely obsessed with that movie. And I think 10 years ago, it would have been the kind of movie where it's like, maybe it still wins the Palme d'Or, but it's not getting the Oscar nominations yet. And this year it's picture, director, actress, probably going to win screenplay. Like, I think that not to say that Letterboxd has anything to do with anything like that, with hitting that sort of level. But I do think that there is something in Letterboxd of people having a greater curiosity for the kinds of stuff that is coming out, the kinds of stuff that they can find, that they can seek out, that's not being marketed like crazy. Like, I genuinely believe that Letterboxd is at least partly responsible for Skinamarink getting the distribution deal that it got, because that movie was not going to get distributed. It got leaked on the internet. People on Letterboxd were watching it off of torrents, and it was doing bananas ratings on
100%.
Letterboxd. Like, it was getting such great ratings on Letterboxd that I'm like, yeah, somebody's going to see that and pick it up, you know? And I think that I know for sure that boutique labels, like from people that I've talked to who run boutique labels, look at Letterboxd reviews when they're considering whether they're going to pick something up or not, and then look at them when, you know, the releases come out and see like what's getting received well and like how that kind of, you know, drives what they're going to go after in the future. And so I definitely think that, I mean, we hear it all the time from filmmakers too, that like they're, especially like indie filmmakers, younger filmmakers who, and like distributors too, who are releasing stuff that's not, you know, the blockbusters or whatever. And they definitely are very actively paying attention to like how people are responding to movies on Letterboxd. And I think that that's a good sign, because I think, you know, there's always rotten apples. There's definitely, you know, some shitbags on Letterboxd, but I think for the most part, it's a really solid community. I think it's a really positive community. I think it's genuinely a community of people who love film. I think that most people who have a Letterboxd account and are reviewing and logging movies regularly are doing it because they really love movies. And so I think that the stuff that's trending on there and like the way that you kind of see that stuff get built up is from people who love movies and like really
100%.
Want this business and this art form to thrive. And I hope that in some kind of small or large way that helps influence the kind of movies that are coming out and that are getting attention.
I mean, that was an excellent way to answer that. There's so much about just the way that a lot of these people that are, you know, watching like 800 movies a year, that, you know, they put so much work into their reviews, and they're just genuinely trying to share a passion for a movie that most people haven't seen. And when you're watching 800 movies a year, most of them are going to be unseen films by most of the zeitgeist. So I'm so impressed for the people that put the work into this. I'm so impressed for the people behind the tool. I mean, we didn't even get to talk about the podcast. There's so much that we could have got into here. All of Mitchell's links are going to be in the description below. Go follow their stuff. Go read the editorials. Go listen to the podcast. Please support them in everything that they do, because Mitchell, you're doing incredible work, and I'm just insanely proud of where you've come in a very short period of time, and just happy to see what you've done to genuinely influence film culture.
Thank you. That means so much. And I mean, likewise, you know, I told you before when we were setting this up, like I'm a really big fan of the podcast. I love physical media. Like physical media, as I said, is, you know, my greatest passion. And so the stuff that people like you that, you know, are doing to push physical media and really like raise the awareness and keep like the physical media community alive, I think is really important. And definitely, you know, I'm always watching and paying attention to what you guys are talking about.
Means the world. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you for doing this, and hopefully we can have another one someday.
For sure.
Thank you for listening to the Disconnected Podcast. There's one big thing that you could do to help the show, and that is to leave a rating and review on the podcast service of your choice. Thank you.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.